Good morning. Hope that you're all doing well. I want to spare time today to dedicate it for one of the most challenging instances that students and researchers face. And this is about literature review. Literature review in itself is not a challenge, but how to go about it can be quite challenging, especially to students and new researchers. So I want us today to look at how to undertake literature review, especially one that is geared towards writing an academic paper, such as a proposal or a thesis, or merely a research project. It is important that we fully understand how to go about it, because if it is not properly done, then we face the danger of not having adequate information or having too much information, most of which is not relevant, or having information without acknowledging the sources, and that can raise serious credibility and professionalism about ourselves. And that is why understanding how literature review is undertaken becomes critical for students and scholars. I want us to look at the various steps that you are required to take when you are doing the literature review, so that at the end of it, you have literature that is both adequate and relevant to the issues or the assignment that you are undertaking. Maybe we need to begin by having a recap of what literature review is. And we want to define literature review as the integrated analysis of scholarly writings and other relevant evidence related directly to one's area of research interest. In other words, when you talk about literature review, we mean going through scholarly writings that are thought as being relevant to what we are interested in researching and writing about. Sometimes literature review is also understood as collection of survey, research, and critical evaluation and assessment of the existing literature in a preferred domain. Domain here would mean the various areas that we are interested in, or fields of study that we are enrolled in. It also understood as a formal piece of writing where the researcher analyzes the existing theoretical framework, principles, and assumptions, and use that as a base to shape approach to the research question. So all these are definitions that have been given as to what literature review is. Lastly, we want to understand literature review as one that represents a synthesis of the evidence that provides background information on the research problem and shows association between the evidence and the study objectives. So basically, when we talk about literature review, we simply mean collecting information that is relevant to our study or to our area of interest, and then reading them through critically, picking out information that we consider as relevant to our need, and then writing them down. So that is basically what we mean by literature review. I now want us to look at the various steps that we need to undertake when we are undertaking a literature review. One of the first things that we're required to do as a researcher, a scholar, or as a student is to select a research problem. You select a research problem. A research problem is simply the issue that you wish to investigate. Now, this would relate to those who are doing research, either at project, at dissertation, or at thesis level. So if you are doing a research at that level, the first thing that you do is to select a research problem. A research problem is simply an issue that you wish to carry out an investigation for purposes of providing information that supports it. So what you do in the first place is to come up with a research problem. Sometimes we can call it a research topic, or sometimes simply the assignment that you want to undertake. This one might apply to instances where students have been given an assignment and then have been asked to go and carry out a literature review in a library setting for purposes of providing information and scholarly materials that best fits and answers that particular assignment. So the first thing that is expected of students, of research and scholars when they want to do literature review is first and foremost to come up with a research problem, because a research problem tells you what you need to do. It tells you what you need to do, because without it, then it becomes quite difficult in terms of knowing which information in the literature is relevant or not relevant. So the first thing that you do as a researcher is to come up with a research problem. And it can also be called a research topic if it is at the research level. But if it is an assignment given by the student in class, then you use the assignment that you have been given as your research problem, or the issue that you wish to investigate. The second thing that you do with regard to literature review is you define your research objectives. You define your research objectives. And by research objectives, we mean those definitive statements which provide a clear and concise description of what the researcher seeks to achieve by conducting the research. So you must come up with the research objectives. If it is, say, an assignment that has been given to students, the equivalent of the research objectives might be the subtopics that you now develop. Once you have developed your subtopics, then those subtopics guides you in terms of searching for the kind of literature that you need to enable you answer that particular assignment. So what is done here in the context of research is you come up with your research objectives. Once you have a research topic or research problem, then you come up with the research objectives. And objectives here, I mean specific objectives, because it is the specific objectives that you are now able to know the kind of literature that will enable you understand more about the issues that you seek to answer in that particular objective. So the first thing, the second thing that you do after coming up with your research problem is to define your research objectives. Again, there is a clip on research objectives, and I wish to refer students who may be interested in understanding more about research objectives so that they now go through that, understand what objectives are, the types of objectives that are available, as well as what makes good research objectives. So the second thing that you do is you define your research objectives, because literature review is done as per the objectives. Each objective guides you in terms of what you need to research on. The third step, or the third issue that you do once you have identified your research objectives, or you have defined your research objectives, is now to identify the literature. What kind of literature do you need to enable you answer, or to enable you respond to the various issues that you want to investigate in your research objective? Now, identification of the literature involves identification of databases that provide the most relevant sources, and then you identify relevant terms, which are then added to the research, or rather to the search strategy. We also know that literature can be obtained from books, from journals, from internet sites, stations, conference papers, government, institutional, or even industry reports. Now, there are again several strategies that you can use as a researcher to identify the literature that you need. We have what we call exhaustive method, representative method, and also concentration method. When you talk about exhaustive method, we mean assembling all relevant materials, while representative method refers to the sourcing for relevant articles in a small number of top-tier journals in the field. When you talk of concentration, it means focusing on prior empirical studies or conceptual papers that initiated a line of investigation and changed how problems or questions were framed, introduced new methods or concepts. So when you talk of identification of literature, assuming, for instance, I'm interested in understanding factors that contribute to drug abuse in society as a possible research problem, then what is needed at that level is for me to now assemble all literature that talks about alcohol and drug abuse. I must bring all information that talks about alcohol and drug abuse, whether it's a chapter in a book, whether it's a journal publication, whether it is a specific internet site that is dedicated to alcohol and drug abuse, whether it is a dissertation that was previously done which focused on alcohol and drug abuse, whether it's a conference paper that was presented by individuals or organizations around or about alcohol and drug abuse, or whether they are government, institutional, or industry reports about alcohol and drug abuse. So I must first put all that information somewhere, must just put it together. Once I put it together, then I now move to the next stage. And the next stage is now what we call searching and refining the literature. When we are searching and refining literature, we mean the evaluation of the applicability and suitability of the material identified in the previous step. And the researcher here is expected to develop a set of predetermined rules that provides a basis for inclusion or exclusion of materials. It's also expected of the researcher to determine the scope of literature search. Is it based on demographics, time period, study type, geographic region, in order to reduce the amount of materials to be reviewed? Let me explain this further. That, for instance, you want to look at drug and alcohol abuse, the causes of drug and alcohol abuse. So what you do here at Search and Refine is you develop the scope of the literature search. Is it demographics? For instance, you might be interested in materials or literature that talks about alcohol and drug abuse among the youth. That becomes a demographic. So based on that, you are simply interested in looking at literature that talks about a population that is aged, say, between 19 to 39. If that is what in your study you define as a youth, or maybe you want to, you are concerned about alcohol and drug abuse among teenagers. So you're basically looking at literature that talks about alcohol and drug abuse among teenagers, because any other alcohol abuse in groups that are not part of teenagers is outside your scope of the study. So you restrict yourself to that demographic. Or maybe somebody was interested in studying alcohol abuse among women. So any literature that talks about alcohol and drug abuse in women becomes relevant to you. And the ones that talk about men are not relevant. So you discard that. Again, time period also becomes quite important. What is the information that you need about? Maybe you are interested only in literature that is 10 years old from the time you are doing your study. You say you are doing your study in 2023 and you say, I'm only interested in literature that is 10 years old prior to my study, then you'll only be looking for literature that was established from 2010 onwards. Any literature that is that was published before 2013, rather 2013, that is not relevant to your case because it is older than 10 years. Or maybe you said you are only interested in literature that is 5 years old. That means if you're doing a study in 2023, then you are only going to focus on literature that was established from 2018 onwards. Any other literature before that time is not relevant to a study. Again, geographic scope. Maybe sometimes you're interested in understanding drug abuse in Africa, drug abuse in Europe, drug abuse in Asia, drug abuse in East Africa, drug abuse in Kenya, or you're interested in understanding drug abuse in India as a country. So that again, you are going to limit yourself only to literature that is specific to a given geographical area of your interest. Any information that is outside that might not be relevant to your case. And this is necessary because then you are now searching and refining the literature. Refining now the literature means you are defining the scope within which you want to understand your literature. Is it demographically? Is it in terms of time? Is it in terms of study type? Is it in terms of geographic region? So that search and refining literature becomes important. Otherwise, you can have all the literature, but again, you must ensure that you are not overwhelmed by the amount of information that you have. It could be too much to the point that refining it and having it being processing it to look relevant to your study becomes challenging. The other step is now to read and analyze the literature. You have now grouped your literature based on the defined scope: geography, demographics, type of study, and even time period. You have already have that, and all the literature you have grouped them and assembled them because they are now relevant. Now you are required now to read the literature and then analyze it. You are required to read, you summarize, and describe each source of information. And by doing so, you note the findings while also noting points of departure among the authors. What you are required to do here as a researcher is, for instance, to state that a study that sought to find out factors contributing to drug and alcohol abuse in India found that drug abuse is caused by A, B, C, D. So you note that one down. Once you've noted that one down, again you read another piece of literature. Again, you try to read, summarize, and describe each source. Again, you'll say, a study that was conducted by so and so, say in Kenya, on factors contributing to drug and alcohol abuse, revealed that A, B, C, D are the main causes of drug abuse. Again, you do that. Once you've done that, you are now then required to point out instances of similarities and differences among the findings. For instance, you might say that studies that were conducted by authors 1, author 2, author 3 revealed that drug abuse is caused by 1, 2, 3, 4 factors. However, studies conducted by so and so and so revealed that drug abuse is caused by this and this and this. In other words, you have grouped together studies whose findings are similar and also grouped together studies whose findings are different. That similarity becomes quite important. So that you must do this, again, understanding the context under which particular studies were done. For instance, you might want to observe that the differences probably was because maybe studies were done under different social contexts. For instance, one study might find poverty as a contributing factor to drug abuse. Then another study might dispute poverty as a possible factor. Probably the one that found poverty as a leading factor probably is a study that was done in societies where poverty is common, and therefore people are being driven to drug because of frustration arising from economic difficulties. Maybe the other study that did not find any link between drug abuse and poverty did so because the study probably was done among the affluent community, and therefore people are not poor. So poverty cannot be a contributing factor to drug abuse. Probably availability of money among populations has made them irresponsible and therefore susceptible to drug abuse. So you have to look at all these things by looking at what is the context of the study, what kind of geographical area, what kind of research participants, what kind of target population was the different studies, because differences and similarities in study findings can be attributed either to the methodology that was used to conduct the study or the population that the study targeted. So when you read and then you analyze. Analysis here means you look at those causes deeply for purposes of analyzing or understanding any uniformities in findings or differences in those particular findings. So again, you're also required to read and again do further analysis or synthesis of the literature. I think the right term here is read and synthesize the literature. And this step involves gathering or extracting applicable information from each primary study that is included in the sample and deciding what is relevant to the problem of interest. It's also important for the researcher to note down where and why the study was conducted, as well as findings of the study. The researcher should also evaluate the strengths and weakness of individual sources, the bias, methodologies, and thoroughness of the sources. The researcher should group the results of the literature review in terms of those that support or contradict research objectives or questions. The researcher should carefully note down consensus on divergence of opinion in the literature, as well as controversies in the literature on the topic. Here, as a researcher now, you're required now to write down what you have gathered, clearly specifying what the study was about, where the study was done, the method of sampling that was used, and the findings of the study. You do that to one literature, you proceed to another literature, and again to another literature. Once you have done that, you'll now be in a position to understand which groups of studies that you have listed down their findings have findings that are similar, and which ones have findings that are different. So you need to group them together. Again, you might also want to ask yourself which regions tend to have findings that lean towards a given direction, and which ones again have findings that also tend to lean towards another direction. That kind of thing is important, so that when you're now putting down your study, your literature, you are in a position to know which literature supports your study and which one contradict your study. Again, be clear in terms of your reading whether findings of previous studies have been unanimous towards one direction or they have been contradictory, so that we are now able to say that findings of previous studies on this subject have been contradictory, and therefore this lack of unanimity requires that more studies on this subject is done for purposes of enlightening the scientific community further or scholars further about these issues. The last thing that you do as a researcher is now to write the review. You are now required to present your literature. And presenting your literature, first you show the author, the year when the work was published, what the study was about, the methodology that was used, and the findings of the study. Again, organize your literature by theme to ensure that all the sources with a similar focus are put together. And this makes it easy to discern the differences in perspectives in terms of these writings. Again, present your literature from the same region together. For instance, literature from Europe, present it together, from America, present it together, from Asia, present it together, and from Africa, present together. and this should be done in a logical flow. The other thing that needs to be done is discuss the literature showing the findings, how it informs your study, and what the study intends to do over and above existing literature. For instance, you might say that previous studies have focused on the youth generally and have shown that cases of drug abuse among the youth is caused by particular factors. And assuming, for instance, you are interested in looking at drug abuse among persons with disability, then you now say that previous studies have not shown much interest in terms of understanding what causes drug abuse among people with disability. And therefore, the present study seeks to extend our understanding of drug abuse also to persons with disability. Here, you are demonstrating that even though there is literature that has spoken about drug abuse, such literature or such previous studies have focused on a totally different population than the one that you intend to focus on. And therefore, by you taking a different direction, it means therefore that your study will be adding new knowledge to what already exists. And therefore, good literature review is not simply a summary of previous studies, but one that shows signs of synthesis. When you talk of synthesis, we simply mean grouping together studies that have similar findings. Again, evidence of analytical thinking and connections between existing literature and the current study. It's a discussion that you bring on board and you show where what you want to do is similar or depart from what already has been done. That is how we undertake our literature review. In our next discussion, I will take you through about how we cite our sources. So citations will be what we shall discuss in our next lecture. Thank you.